Our next presentation is by Erin Clark, who will discuss practical strategies for effective boards. Erin is a member of the firm in our Hagerstown office. She joined SEK in 2009, 17 years of experience currently. She graduated from Mount St. Mary's University with a bachelor's in accounting and an MBA. More than 40 nonprofit engagements annually, ranging from annual revenues from 100,000 to 150 million and more. She performs CFO services and grant administration for a nonprofit that receives between $1 and $2 million in federal funds annually. She currently serves and has previously served in several board treasurer roles, and her bucket list item is to visit every MLB stadium. So I will turn it over to Erin.
So the presentation I have for you all this morning really gets away from a lot of the technical stuff that we talk a good bit about, and we wanted to just hone in on why your board engagement matters and some effective strategies to really continue that board engagement. So board engagement is a core driver of effective governance, and it helps to strengthen oversight and ensure compliance. So there's a lot of things that as a nonprofit you have responsibility for, and it's not just at the staff level. It's not just the executive director and the employees who are responsible for that, but your board members should also maintain oversight to ensure proper compliance as well. It also leads to increased credibility with stakeholders and ultimately allows for stronger financial oversight of your organizations. So we're going to go through a couple strategies here, and all of these tie into what I consider three foundational responsibilities of all board members. First of those being fiduciary oversight. That's going to include things like your finances, compliance, and risk. Strategic leadership, which looks more to the long-term direction and sustainability. So while the oversight is sort of an ongoing year after year requirement that all of your board members need to have, that strategic leadership looks sort of beyond 1 year and maybe into 3, 5, 10 years to determine if you're advancing the organization in the direction that you want, and if you're ultimately sustainable to continue fulfilling the mission that you're trying to serve. And then that ties into the third responsibility, which is mission stewardship, or advancing and protecting your organizational purpose. And all in all, these three responsibilities really drive engagement, because when board members clearly understand their level of accountability, they can be more actively involved in making the decisions, both operationally and for long-term growth for the organization. So now we'll get into the strategies. And again, these are all meant to provide some food for thought. I understand that many of you represent nonprofits from a variety of industries and sizes, and you may find that some of them are easier to adopt than others. You may also find that some of them just are a little more challenging than needed to implement. But hopefully some of these will provide some practical strategies for keeping your board as effective as possible. Strategy number one is anchoring engagement in the fiduciary duties. So when I have people ask me as a new board member, what is it exactly that I'm responsible for doing? Do I just show up to meetings, vote on a couple things, provide some input? Yes to all of that, but that's really just a basic level. So formal reviews for things like your audited financial statements, Form 990, and other regulatory filings. I know that a lot of organizations may not have a full audit. Maybe you only have a review, or again, maybe you don't have any attestation requirements, but you still more than likely would at least file a Form 990. Maybe you also have your state charitable registrations. And so any of those filings that you have to do to maintain compliance with state or even federal regulations, having a basic understanding of those is critical for every single board member. It's also critical that you have conflict of interest disclosures, and those are things that should be updated on an annual basis. So it's completely okay if you have, what we call related party transactions. Maybe you have a board member who works for a company that provides services to your nonprofit. That's completely okay, but you should have conflict of interest disclosures to make sure that everybody is aware of that, and that individual should obviously abstain from voting on any types of contract renewals or anything related to that potential conflict of interest. And you also want to reinforce that compliance and oversight cannot be delegated away from the board. So in a couple slides, we'll talk about committees and maybe some other opportunities to stretch out the capacity, knowing that our volunteers are limited and that we want to try to have the board be supported as much as possible. But compliance and oversight are two things that you really cannot delegate away. And it's also something that you can only say maybe your officers or president and your treasurer are responsible for. These are things that all of your board members, regardless of position, really need to maintain. And the result of implementing this strategy is that decision making becomes more strategic instead of reactive. So then strategy number two is to connect board work to mission impact. And I'm going to tie this in also with the question earlier about, or someone asked about for organizations whose staff are entirely volunteers. This also aligns perfectly because whether they are board members or volunteers, everyone working for your organization really, really needs to be aligned with the work that the organization does. One of my absolute favorite things that I have seen some boards do is to begin each meeting with a mission moment. And it doesn't need to be lengthy, it doesn't need to be a drawn out 20 to 30-minute conversation, but just a 2 to 3 minute snip of something that happened that month or that quarter, depending on how frequently you meet, that really ties everybody in the meeting together of why we're here. This is why we do what we do. This is who we have served and why it matters. Because yes, you're going to get into the discussions of the financials and the strategic decisions and the some of the conversations that have to happen. But if you start by tying that back to a clear mission moment, it just reinforces why everybody's there for the organization that you're representing and that you're serving. Another component of this is to use outcome-based dashboards. So what I mean here is that, it's very easy to get financial reports. Maybe that's, a balance sheet and a profit and loss. Maybe you're looking at budget to actual. Maybe you have other non-financial metrics that you're looking at. But if you can look at those dashboards in a manner that ties to outcomes, looking at, again, number of individuals served, how you're moving the needle to drive that mission, the overall impact, looking at a trend analysis, again, that can be financial, operational, and other data. Those, again, will connect the board to overall impact more than just kind of looking at line by line, talking about numbers and different things like that. You also want to explicitly link decisions to mission advancement. So you're going to have a lot of conversations within your board meeting. And what I tend to find with nonprofits is it's very easy to get stretched thin because we want to try to be all things to all people. But at the end of the day, if we are not taking a step back and reevaluating our mission, making sure that the decisions we are making as a board very clearly link to our mission or our mission of where we want to be. Maybe we are strategizing and revamping that mission. But if they don't tie to that, then maybe we should be reevaluating the place of holding time for that discussion, either in that boardroom or going forward. And the result of this strategy is when you implement the connection of board work to mission impact, board members then see themselves as mission stewards, not just people who are voting or approving a slate of consent items and checking the box on things. Strategy three is to run meetings that invite engagement. Shift routine updates to consent agendas. I understand again that some of you may have boards that meet more frequently and others meet less frequently, depending again on your use of having committees or other volunteers. Maybe your board members are the core component of everybody that volunteers, and there's a lot of information that needs shared with them. But if you have proper planning ahead of time, you can have complete consent agendas sent out to everybody well in advance of the meeting that you don't have to spend 45 minutes to an hour, just going through routine topics, unless there are questions. So if you can shift that to a consent agenda and not have that be part of the overall board discussion, that can make meetings more effective and more efficient. Because I know I, for one, have sat through board meetings as a board member that have gone on 2 and 3 hours. And I think we all understand that at that point, the engagement definitely declines when you really start losing people. Minimize staff presentations. I think bringing in staff to talk about important parts of your operations, especially as they drive the mission, can be critical because it does get back to that, engagement and building mission stewards. But you want to minimize those, right? You want to make sure that they are contained in a manner that will, again, keep the board as active and actively engaged as possible. On the flip side, you want to maximize board questions. So invite discussion that allows for your board members to ask questions and to further the discussion then based off of topics that actually matter to your board. Sometimes, we get really down into the weeds and go into rabbit holes that maybe aren't necessarily have the place at a board meeting. So try to drive the discussion in a manner that will maximize those board questions for ultimate discussion and true engagement. Strategic discussions lead to clear decisions. There's no question about what it is that we're trying to accomplish because when we have the ability to ask those questions and be involved, your board then becomes confident in the decision making that they're doing. And when you bring in outside presenters, whether it's your auditor or a consultant or whoever it is, ask them to frame issues in a matter of why does this matter to our organization? What's at stake if we do or don't implement things that maybe you're suggesting? And what actions ultimately does the board need to take? If those are your focus points, again, we kind of get out of the weeds a little bit and allow your board to make effective decisions. Your result here is that your meetings become empowering and not just a sense of obligation. Strategy four, I've mentioned this already a little bit, but use committees strategically. If you don't currently have subcommittees of your board and you have the manpower to create committees, I strongly recommend that. When you do so, you want to create clear committee charters with a level of authority. Maybe you have a chairperson that operates as the liaison to the full board. And you want to align your committees with major risk and priority areas. So some of the kind of more common committees that I see are a finance committee, maybe intertwined with an audit committee, or maybe separate, again, depending on the size and operations of your organization. A governance committee, which would oversee policies and procedures, bringing on new board members and officer slates, things like that. And then a development committee, which would be tasked predominantly with developing, whether that's developing as a fundraising mechanism, developing the board, developing staff, etc. There's certainly other committee options, but those are kind of the ones we see more frequently. But again, align them with the needs of your organization. If you don't have a strong uh, finance personnel, maybe that's an opportunity to have an outsourced service, but maybe that's also an opportunity to build a finance committee as a volunteer subcommittee of your board. You can also use committees to rotate leadership and build future officers. I know a lot of times I've been asked to join a board and I'm simply at max capacity, and I know doing so will cause me to be stretched too thin to really operate as an effective board member. So one way that I'm able to contribute is as a committee member. And nonprofits have used that strategically to kind of get my foot in the door as a committee member. And then over time, I can ultimately step in the board role when that opportunity becomes more feasible for me, where I can be a more engaged board member. So the result of this strategy is that well-designed committees drive engagement in between meetings and again allow for those meetings to truly be more strategically focused and decision-based and not just discussion focused. Strategy number five is to strengthen financial literacy. This one is obviously near and dear to my heart because this is where I'm passionate about. But providing up-to-date financials, nothing makes making decisions harder than not having accurate, up-to-date information. So again, regardless of how frequently you meet, maybe you're utilizing a finance committee to review financials in the interim, but you want to make sure that you're providing your board members with up-to-date financials, and as a board member, actually reviewing them with the level of detail that they deserve. Focus on areas such as trends. Again, we talked about that a couple slides back, but trend analysis can be a lot more telling than just looking at lines of numbers. Budget to actual is critical from an operational standpoint because it looks at where you thought you were going to be and how you're measuring to that. It also then allows you to determine for the future year's budget if you need to readjust some things. Liquidity and reserves are a great area to look beyond the current year and say, hey, how are we doing to really be able to fund operations beyond a year? Do we have the liquidity to make payroll and pay our bills? Do we have reserves that if cash stops coming in the door for a short period of time, we would continue to be able to pay our other expenses? And then flowing into that, long-term sustainability risks. Are there areas that we have concerns about long-term sustainability or growth? Are there programs that expenses or the cost to operate those programs are exceeding the revenues that we bring in? Maybe we need to reevaluate. Maybe we need to realign with our mission. These are all critical areas of discussion that the financial component here has in this board engagement. And ultimately, you want to translate the financials into plain language insights. And what I mean there is that so often I hear people say, well, that's just the treasurer or the finance committee's role. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a finance person. And we get that. But going back to the original slide where we talked about every board member having those key fiduciary responsibilities, as a board member, it is absolutely on everybody's plate to make sure that they are at least at a base level understanding the financials. The result here is that well-informed boards make better financial decisions. There is a poll that popped up, so as we go to the next slide, please make sure you answered that. That'll lead us into strategy number 6, which is to engage the board in fundraising. I haven't been involved in a board yet that hasn't asked board members to be part of fundraising, and the ultimate starting point for that is to set clear and realistic expectations. So before you even bring somebody new onto your board, make sure they know what their role is. Are they responsible personally for contributing? Is it going to just be to assist the board in getting other fundraising in the door? Set those expectations up front so there's no surprises later. Offer multiple ways to give or multiple ways to participate. So as a board member, you can give your own time, talent, and treasure. You can get or ask others to give their time, talent, and treasure. And if you can't or aren't able to do one of those first two, advocate for the organization, sell the mission, tell the stories, allow others to see why the organization matters in the work that they do and why giving to that organization is so important. And as an organization, you want to provide tools to your board members, give them talking points, mission stories. The greatest thing that I ever hear from organizations is a story right from an individual who was served by the organization that shares how the organization impacted them in their time of need. That is going to be your best fundraising tool, and you absolutely want to share that with your board when you're asking them to engage in fundraising and in selling your mission. And if you have the staff support in either a development coordinator or administrative support to help in that as well, that is also always important. The result of this strategy is that when you expand your fundraising reach to your board members and other volunteers, ultimately it's going to lead to new supporters. And then in addition to that, relationship-based engagement leads to sustainable recurring supporters because they believe in the mission and they understand that the money that they are giving is actually going to the greater good. And then our last strategy here, number 7, is just to encourage accountability and continuous improvement. Conduct annual board self-assessments, hold each other accountable. Are people attending meetings? Are they actively engaged or are they just taking up a board seat but not really contributing? Evaluating your CEO and executive director performance against strategy. Your board should absolutely be overseeing that annual performance evaluation. Not just are they checking the boxes in filling the roles for the job description, but are we ultimately strategizing in a way that's advancing the mission of our organization? And then periodically review your board composition and skill sets. So if you have a huge board, but you don't have the legal or the financial or the HR background, those tend to be the 3 areas, maybe IT being a 4th, where I see boards constantly looking for that skill set. Reevaluate that periodically and actively recruit for those positions if you don't have them. And again, if you have committees where maybe you can pull into new resources that you haven't historically had, that's a great opportunity as well. The result of this strategy is that accountability reinforces trust and effectiveness among everybody within your organization. And then this next slide I'm not going to read. I just added into slide deck so that you can have these discussion questions either as leadership of your organization, or if you are a board member, these are certainly questions that you can ask of your board. I would strongly encourage you to go down through and really do this kind of as a self-assessment to really evaluate, are we being as effective as we can be? Are we running meetings efficiently? Are we spending enough time on mission versus operations and really aligning those to ultimately make sure that our strategy is still where we want it to be, or do we need to redefine our mission? That could be, some other discussion. But again, these questions are meant more for you to be able to just refer back to after today's presentation. And then finally, to wrap up and put everything together, I just want the takeaway from this presentation for everyone to be that effective board engagement is intentional. It's not something that you come across accidentally. My hope is that the strategies that I've given you, while none of them are completely earth-shattering, will hopefully provide for conversations and thought-provoking discussions to be intentional in that. And with the proper structure and focus, your boards can meaningfully strengthen governance, mission impact, and long-term sustainability, which was sort of the whole point of this discussion. And implementing these strategies ultimately allows for a board shift from what I call oversight in theory to leadership in practice. And hopefully, again, with an effective board governing in these strategies that I've offered, you can absolutely move the needle and better align your decision making with the mission of your organization. And with that, I believe we are at time. Were there any questions in the Q&A?
There were not. There's just one comment that it was a great presentation and very helpful.
Thank
So
you very much.
thanks, Erin.